I found it very difficult to narrow down what the church and the Lord would be interested in me saying to you all in this Mass from these readings. There were like 12 different homilies in here. Don't worry, though, I narrowed it down to 6. No, all kidding aside, there's a very serious topic here that we will talk about, and it's the problem of evil, right? The problem of death and suffering. It's called a problem. It's really not a problem, but people insist on calling it a problem because their personal encounter and struggle with evil sometimes overcomes their rational understanding of where evil comes from. So we're gonna talk about that because that's what the Book of Wisdom is really about. Before we do, though, homily number 2, though, seriously, very short. Christian social justice has been co-opted to such a tremendous degree in not only our political order, but throughout the world, to mean all sorts of things. Christian social justice, or Christian social doctrine, I should say, most often is used, in fact, to distract us from or to turn our attention away from God and away from heaven and focus purely on forming in this world a utopia, right? This has been the activity of all of the failed socialist states that began with such good intention of establishing some Christian social utopia in the world, but ultimately always fail because, well, really for the reason that we're going to talk about in terms of the problem of pain, but because it has become, it became distracted from the eternal perspective to which our attention always must be drawn to God, and it became very terrestrial. We're going to solve the problems of this world. Namely, we're going to solve poverty. We're going to solve hunger. We're going to solve sickness. We're going to solve the problem of death. Right? That's the proposal, anyways. Of course, it fails. And I want to point out to you here that St. Paul in the letter to the Corinthians can calibrate for us a little bit, can rein back in the true meaning of Christian social responsibility in this little pericope, in this little section of his letter that we have here. First of all, he says, you don't have to give to the poor to the point of you becoming destitute yourself, right? So many times it's this idea of you need to, if you have anything more than anybody else, you're evil. Shame on you for having something more than somebody else has, right? And Paul's saying, no, hold on, slow your roll there. That is not the problem, right? Christian charity is never a question of what effect does the gift have, but from what level of charity does the gift come? Christian charity is not about the hungry person being fed. It's about the compassion of the person who sees the hungry person and moves to love them. Right? And so the idea of Christian social justice is not about solving world hunger. It's not about solving poverty. Remember, Jesus says the poor will always be with you. He's not being unsympathetic there. He's simply saying, guys, there's nothing wrong with being poor. It's not a moral evil to be poor. But if in their poverty someone suffers, and I have the means in my surplus, in my wealth, to provide for them, the Lord says, here is your opportunity to do as I do. Remember what I said to you, as the Father sent me, so I send you. Here's an opportunity for you to do the kind of charity that I'm all about. Will you do it? Right? And it gives an invitation to the heart to say, yes, Lord, I see that suffering and I have a way to solve that problem. Not to solve all problems, but to solve that problem. And he says, not that others should have relief while you are burdened, right? So you don't have to flip the tables. In order to be righteous, you don't have to become the poor suffering one while you give your money to the poor suffering one so that they're rich, but rather you give as your wealth allows. And the reality is, in terms of the distribution of goods in the world, there's a reason people who have something have something. It's because they're intelligent, they know how to use it. Most of the time, there's a reason that people who don't have something don't have something. It's because they're not a good steward of it, they squander it. Most of the time, that's a broad generalization. Don't go writing angry letters about Father Michael being unsensitive to the mentally handicapped or whatever who can't. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about historically and in broad strokes, there's a reason that the people who have and the people who don't. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. If the people who have all of a sudden gave everything they have, if everybody who had anything gave everything they had to all the people who had nothing, the world would have nothing. Right? That's the problem of socialism. That's the problem of redistribution of wealth. That's the problem of overtaxing and overburdening those who are successful for the sake of those who are unsuccessful. We're not talking about moral unsuccess, okay? We're not talking about sinning. We're talking about not being able to understand the way the world works, how resources work, how to use them, and how to multiply them. But in fact, using them in a way that they get squandered and they disappear. Right? So Paul understands that, and in this section, he's talking about that, right? So we're not what Paul is effectively doing here is he's saying, look, there's going to be suffering in the world, there's going to be poverty in the world, there's going to be sickness in the world. If you have something that can help with that, as a Christian, you need to do it. That's the invitation. That's always the invitation. Always evaluate. What do I have? How much do I have? How much can I give? And guys, I almost guarantee you, or I should say I can guarantee this for almost everybody in the room, what you say I can give is only about a quarter of what you can actually give, right? When I look at my budget, I have a budget. I have my own money. I'm a Dawson priest. I'm not a religious priest. I have my own money. I have my own things, right? And I have my own expenses. When I look at my budget, sometimes it's hard for me to say I can divert that much to my. So I have this is the way I do this. Okay, I have my checking account. I have my fund money account. Right? That's for like motorcycle and bullets and, that sort of thing. And I have my rainy day account, right? But I also have a charity account. It's written on the account, charity. That's where all my tithing goes, right? And then I distribute it from that account. Now, sometimes when I get my check and I just think to myself, can I give what I normally give? And I'm going to be vague here because it's up to every individual to decide what they can give, right? It shouldn't matter to you what I give, right? It shouldn't matter to anybody in here what anybody else in here gives except for what you give, right? To the poor. And whether that comes in the vehicle of giving to the parish or giving directly to the poor, doesn't matter. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about how you distribute that. But for me, sometimes I look at that and I'm like, I can't give that because, why can't you, Michael? Because Netflix has gone up $1.50. I don't need Netflix. I don't need that. Somebody else needs a can of beans, right? Somebody else needs to be able to pay their power bill. They're not worried about Netflix. They're worried about getting through the end of the week with their family. So when I look at my resources as a Christian, I'm not looking at them in terms of what can I do to solve all the problems of the world. I'm looking at, Lord, of my resources, what is my capacity to respond to any call for mercy that comes across my radar? What is my capacity? How much can I do in that situation? Right? And there's always some sense of there's always some occasion on the radar because we live in a community, right? Every community has needs. Whether we're talking about our political community, Ackworth, Dallas, Cobb County, Paulding, whatever, or whether we're talking about our spiritual or some other form of community, our parish. There's always a need there, right? I mean, we're just launching our building campaign, paving the way to get a safer road in here for people to be able to come in and out of the parish more easily on our way to building a church, right? That's a need that's going to be present for a while, right? So there's always going to be that invitation to you, hey, of what you've got, what can you give to this? But then there are other perhaps more dramatic, more flashy, more sacrificial invitations that the Lord might be sending your way, right? You encounter somebody, this happened not too long ago, somebody sitting outside the subway, obviously disheveled, looked like they were hungry. So I'm driving down the parking lot. Do I actually pull into a spot, get out of my car, walk over to the guy, say, hey, I got stuff. Looks like you don't have stuff. Do you need some of my stuff for stuff you need? Right? And figure out what that is. Hey, man, you need a sandwich? You're sitting outside the subway. You look hungry. Yes, I need a sandwich. Great, let's go in and get you a sandwich. Right? That came out of recognizing a capacity of taking time, a capacity of taking interest, of extending compassion, and a capacity of expending resources, wealth, right? Whatever, right? This will be the only homily, as it turns out. There was more to say about this than I expected, so we won't get into the problem of death and suffering, except at the very tail end. I'll give you a 2-line answer to that. But he says, your abundance at the present time should supply their needs. Why? So that their abundance may also supply your needs, and there may be equality, right? When he says your abundance supplies their need, he's not saying you're 50-50. That's not the kind of equality he's talking about. He's not talking about everybody having the same amount. He's talking about everybody having what they need out of any pocket that happens to have more than the next person. If I have really full pockets and your pockets are empty, we're both going to dinner and I'm paying. That's the idea, right? Now, I'm not going to give you half of my money. Get your hand out of my pocket. But I will give you what you need, right? And then if the role is ever reversed, that's what. And now this is the kicker. I told you we're not looking at this in terms of a terrestrial order. This is a heavenly order. When we give to the poor, what does Mother Teresa talk to us about giving to the poor? About looking at the poor, about seeing in the poor. We see Christ in the poor. When out of our abundance we give to that person's poverty, in effect giving to Christ from our abundance to his poverty, when we are poor, when we're sinners, when we're in need of grace, when we're in need of salvation, his wealth will provide for our poverty. When we give to the poor, we open ourselves up to receive from God his great benefit to our natural poverty of needing a Savior. In effect, when we give to the poor out of an exercise of charity, we find our salvation. We open ourselves up to the grace of salvation that Christ wants to give us, but can only give it to us if we but first empty our own pockets to make room for him, right, spiritually. Right? This is the important thing. Don't lose sight of the fact that extending mercy is not for carnal, worldly, physical support. It is for spiritual salvation. Right? And we make our decisions based on that. God didn't make death. He doesn't rejoice in the destruction of the living. The problem of evil, 30 seconds solved here. Right? And most of you know this, but some of you might struggle with this and don't know. And you say, how can there be a good God with so much suffering in the world, right? There's this little girl who's just died. The father's a good guy, daughter dies. There's the woman with the hemorrhage, right? She's suffering. We've all got our sufferings in life. It's like, how can there be a good God with so much suffering in the world? Why do we blame God? Right? God made all things good. But in making all things good, he made them so good that they were able to do wrong. They were able to do evil. And they did. We did. Adam and Eve did. And we follow their example in that. And we produce in the world the evil that we blame on God. right? But what God does is says, even though I didn't create this evil, I'm going to save you from it. I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to bring you to myself, right? So the problem of evil is just this. We keep causing it. God keeps fixing it. He'll be able to fix it long after we are able to cause it. So in the end, it's all going to be made right. And for those of us who trust in God, we're going to find ourselves healed, fixed, freed from death, freed from suffering. And this world, which will have passed away, will have had no memory of the suffering and the death that was caused in it by us who are now made perfect in him. Any questions? No? Good.